let's jump right into a really intense medical mystery. We've got a 27-year-old musician, let's call him JB. He's rushed into the ER, breathing crazy fast, his heart is just hammering out of his chest, he's slipping out of consciousness, and he's actively vomiting blood. His little sister is there, absolutely terrified, telling the nurses he's thrown up 3 times in just the last 30 minutes. So right off the bat, we're looking at a human body in total, utter crisis.
The admitting nurse grabs his blood pressure and it comes back at a terrifying 62/40. Now, to put that into perspective, that is a catastrophic medical emergency. At a pressure that low, his body is literally starving for oxygen. His major organs just aren't getting the blood flow they desperately need to survive, which means JB is teetering right on the edge of multi-organ failure. We're talking minutes to live here if the doctors don't step in immediately.
The really critical factor driving this? JB is experiencing something called hematemesis. That's just a fancy medical term for vomiting blood. And because he's done this 3 times in just a half hour, he has lost a massive amount of fluid. Over 20% of his total body fluid, actually. Think about that for a second. 1/5 of the liquid his body needs to even function, just gone. All of this sudden fluid loss throws his body into hypovolemic shock. His racing heart and that rapid breathing, that's his brainstem desperately trying to compensate for the missing volume. Basically, his brain is convinced he's suffocating and is screaming for more oxygen. But to figure out why JB is bleeding out from the inside, and honestly, why his liver is failing so catastrophically at just 27 years old, well, we need to rewind a bit. Let's look at how his alcohol use escalated over time, because it's a pretty tragic buildup. At 13, his irresponsible father started giving him wine. By 16, both his parents had totally abandoned him and his younger sister, so JB dropped out of high school and started drinking every single day just to cope. Fast forward to age 27, and he is literally chugging an entire handle of rum every single morning. That's about 35 shots for breakfast, plus even more before and during his gigs. So what happens when you subject your body to that insane amount of alcohol? The biological breakdown system just jams up. In a normal situation, your liver uses an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase to break down ethanol. It's a neat 3-step process where alcohol eventually turns into harmless acetate, which is basically just vinegar. But when you dump 35 shots a day into the system, massive amounts of alcohol get stuck at step 2. And that step creates acetaldehyde. This stuff is highly poisonous. It's actually really similar to the embalming fluid used on mummies. This poison runs rampant, damaging the liver's DNA, provoking the immune system, and causing massive, irreversible scarring. Which brings us to some really weird physical changes his bandmates noticed a couple of weeks before this ER visit. JB's face and neck had gotten incredibly thin, but his belly was severely swollen. And the wildest part? His skin and the whites of his eyes had turned this strange brownish yellow color. So here's our first biological mystery for this explainer. Why on earth does liver failure change the actual color of your body? Well, the final irreversible stage of this liver damage is called cirrhosis. And what's super fascinating here is that the word cirrhosis actually comes from the ancient Greek word kyros, which literally translates to brownish yellow color. Hit the nail on the head, right? In JB's case, he has what's called decompensated cirrhosis. That means his liver is basically a block of scar tissue. It's completely unfunctional and his body can't adapt or compensate for the damage anymore. So why exactly did he turn yellow? It's like this. Your red blood cells live for about 120 days. When their time is up, the leftovers are sent to the liver to be broken down into a chemical called bilirubin. A healthy liver mixes that bilirubin with bile to digest fats. And fun fact, that's actually what turns human waste brown. But since JB's liver is essentially dead, that bilirubin has nowhere to go. It completely skips being processed, flows right back into his bloodstream, and physically binds to his skin and eyes, literally staining him from the inside out. All right, on to our second symptom to decode. JB's bandmates saw a really severe mental decline. He was constantly stumbling around, slurring his words, just completely confused, even at times when they knew for an absolute fact he hadn't touched a drop of alcohol yet. They totally thought he was just incredibly drunk, but what was actually happening was far, far more dangerous. It all boils down to toxic ammonia. See, when your body digests proteins, they produce nitrogen. A working liver takes that nitrogen and converts it into a water-soluble form so you can just easily pee it out. But Jay's failing liver? It's leaving this raw, fertilizer-like ammonia to just flow freely through his bloodstream. It eventually crosses the blood-brain barrier and literally scrambles his brain cells.
It's a terrifying condition called hepatic encephalopathy, basically a severe brain disorder directly caused by a broken liver. And then there's our third mystery. A little earlier in the year, JB took a tumble down some stairs and got a pretty nasty bruise. Now, we all get bruises, right? Totally normal occurrence. But JB's bruise, it never went away. This lingering, stubborn bruise is actually a huge visual red flag for an invisible, terrifying failure happening deep inside his body. Here's the deal. Your liver acts like a massive factory that churns out blood clotting factors. When you get a cut, or even a bruise, which remember is just bleeding right under the skin, these clotting factors act like microscopic superglue to patch up the damage. But since his cirrhosed liver is barely making any of that glue, the internal bleeding from his fall down the stairs just couldn't patch itself up. His muscles just kept slowly, indefinitely bleeding. Now, to wrap our heads around the grand finale of this crisis, why JB is violently vomiting blood in the emergency room, we first have to understand how blood routes through the digestive tract. Literally everything you swallow goes through the hepatic portal system straight to the liver. This is known as first-pass metabolism. It's the exact reason why a pill you swallow might be, say, 220 milligrams, but if you injected that same medication, you'd only need a tiny fraction of that dose. The swallowed drug hits the liver first and gets heavily filtered out. But remember what we said about JB's liver. It's not a soft, squishy, functioning filter anymore. It is a rock-solid wall of scar tissue. So all that blood rushing from his stomach and intestines hits a massive roadblock. The hepatic portal vein is completely blocked up, which forces an insane amount of pressure to build backward. The blood has literally nowhere else to go, so it violently pushes back against the super delicate veins lining his stomach and esophagus. These bulging, highly pressurized veins are called varices, and this right here is exactly what triggered the massive emergency room crisis we started with. The varices simply couldn't handle that intense back pressure for another second, and they exploded. This is called a variceal hemorrhage. JB's stomach was rapidly filling up with his own blood, and without instant medical help, he would literally bleed to death from the inside out. So to stop JB from dying right there on the ER table, the doctors have to bust out some incredibly drastic interventions. I mean, they are sending tubes down his throat to physically tie off the exploding veins with tiny rubber bands. They're pumping him full of an IV drug called octreotide to aggressively slow down the blood flow in his abdomen. They might even have to thread a wire through his neck all the way down into his liver to punch a physical bypass tunnel called a TIPS shunt just to relieve that pressure. Oh, and they're giving him lactulose to try and flush that toxic ammonia out of his brain. But here's the scary part. These are all just temporary stopgaps. The harsh reality is none of those heroic measures actually fix his broken liver. Without a brand new liver via a full transplant, JB's facing a super grim 70% chance of dying within just 3 months. Basically, in 90 days, it's highly likely his body will just completely give out. And this is where the math becomes absolutely heartbreaking. Back in 2016, which is when this medical scenario takes place, the average wait time on the national organ transplant list was 149 days. Finding a matching donor took, on average, way longer than JB's 90-day survival window. The supply of healthy matching livers just does not even come close to meeting the demand. Now, in the context of this specific medical case, JB got incredibly lucky. Thanks to the unwavering support of his sister, he was able to manage his addiction, and a matching donor was miraculously found right in the nick of time, which allowed his 27-year-old body to make a full recovery. It really highlights the medical guidelines around moderate drinking, capping it at no more than 1 to 2 shots of hard liquor equivalent per day before age 65. But even more than that, it proves that alcoholism is, at its core, a human problem that requires deep, compassionate human support. However, I've got to tell you, the true inspiration behind this explainer wasn't quite so lucky. JB's specific medical details are actually based on Ron Pigpen McKernan. He was the legendary counterculture keyboardist and a founding member of the Grateful Dead. Tragically, Pigpen passed away at the very young age of 27 from a variceal hemorrhage back in 1973, which was decades before modern stopgaps like octreotide or TIPS shunts even existed to buy him a little more time. Which really leaves us with a stark reminder of our own fragility when it comes to the unyielding mechanics of the human body. Our organs are incredibly resilient, right? Filtering our blood, processing all those toxins, keeping us alive day in and day out without us ever having to give it a second thought. But they absolutely have a breaking point. So, I want to leave you with this. When facing down the absolute limits of human biology, how much damage are you asking your own liver to silently adapt to today?